Hello, and welcome to the MyHeritage webinar series. I'm Marianne Pierre-Louis, your host, broadcasting to you live from Eastern Massachusetts. Today we have Melissa Barker, who is with us live in Tennessee for her class, MyHeritage, Your Personal Genealogy Archive. Thanks to Melissa, and thanks to the nearly 1,500 of you for registering for today's live webinar. So wherever and whenever you are, glad to have you with us. And now to introduce our speaker, Melissa Barker is a certified archives manager and public historian currently working at the Houston County, Tennessee Archives. She is affectionately known as the Archive Lady to the genealogy community. She lectures, teaches, and writes about the genealogy research process, researching in archives, and records preservation. She writes a popular blog entitled A Genealogist in the Archives and is a well-known published book reviewer. Please put your virtual hands together and let's give Melissa Barker a nice, warm webinar welcome. Melissa, how are you? Welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Marianne. So glad to be here.
Well, it is wonderful to have you back at Legacy, and I think this is the first time doing a MyHeritage webinar.
It is, and so I'm very excited to get this going and to talk about MyHeritage and our personal archives.
Well, time's all yours, Melissa.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for attending this presentation. One of my goals for this presentation today is to show you that MyHeritage is like any other archive out there. They are full of records, and so we're going to talk about that, and let's see. There we go. So looking at MyHeritage, are you using MyHeritage records to benefit your genealogy research? Now, I've been a genealogist for 33 years. This is my 33rd year. I started in 1990 when my daughter was born. And I also am an archivist. I started being an archivist 11 years ago. So before I was an archivist, I was a professional genealogist starting in 2004. And once I became an archivist and I started working with those genealogists coming into my archive, I started realizing that genealogists seemingly just don't use all of those resources that are available to you. Now, when I started doing genealogy research, this was back in the days when there wasn't a whole lot online. So I actually had to go to places or write letters or phone calls, things like that. And so while so much has come online, I can tell you from an archivist standpoint that there's still so much more we need to be going to those archives, calling them, but we should also be using things like MyHeritage to help us with that. So are you just skimming the surface of what MyHeritage has to offer? Many genealogists get on these websites like MyHeritage and they just kind of skim the surface. Maybe they just put in a surname in that search bar and then they leave and they're done. We really need to give ourselves the practice of digging into like MyHeritage websites. We need to think about how we conduct our research when we're at an archive or when we're talking to an archive or when we're an archive website and use that same process, that same tenacity and use that with the MyHeritage records because I can almost guarantee you will find something. There is a lot on this website, and they're adding to it all the time. And we should always be using every record source available to us. And one of the things I find genealogists have a hard time with is that sometimes you have to take a lot of legwork to find just where the record's located. And you have to do that legwork even online. And so MyHeritage should be treated just like any other archive. You should dig. You should be searching, clicking on anything and everything to try to find these records. And we're going to talk about some specific record sources too. So first, let's talk about what is an archive. Now, I use this in a lot of my presentations because I find when I talk to genealogists, they maybe don't have a full picture of what an archive is and a full picture of what all kind of archives are out there. So the Society of American Archivists glossary of terms, if you want to go find a glossary of terms that would help you for archive terms, this is a fantastic glossary. They define an archive as an organization that collects the records of individuals, families, and other organizations. That's a very broad definition, but it encompasses everything, all of those documents and photographs, artifacts, scrapbooks, diaries, quilts that your grandmother made. So an archive could literally contain anything. Archives are everywhere. And I like to say there's an archive for everything. I'm always surprised by when I see something in one of my emails that I'm told about a new archive that's opened up, or an archive that has this type of a collection. And I think, you mean they actually archive those things? So there's an archive everywhere, and there's an archive for everything. So let's talk about some different kinds of archives that we might encounter or that we should be looking for. First and foremost are county archives. Now, not every county has a county archives. We are extremely fortunate in the state of Tennessee that our Tennessee State Library and Archives is very active about helping to get established county archives in all of our counties. We have 95 counties in the state of Tennessee, and right now about 74 of them have an active working county archive, and that's where I work. I work at a county archive. So what do county archives do? Well, first and foremost, they manage, collect, and organize the government records for their county. Now, we as genealogists, we want to do research in these government records, and so keep in mind, this is one of their number one jobs. But many of our local county archives also collect and preserve local historical records and genealogical records. Now, I put in parentheses, but not always. The reason I do that is because there are some county archives that strictly stick with those county government records. They maybe have a local historical society that does the historical and genealogical records, or a museum. Now, as far as I'm concerned, in my county, I am it. I am the only entity that is collecting and preserving our local historical records and genealogical records. So we have chosen to add these records to our archives. Many times these county archives are funded by the county government in their budgets, or by donations. A lot of times these county archives are operated by strictly volunteers, or they have paid county staff members. But these also should not be confused with other archives. Sometimes I find genealogists will go to a particular archive, maybe it's a county archive, do the research, and then think that's it. That's all the records. There's no more. There's no other kind of archive in the community, which is probably farther from the truth. And so you need to be looking for all kinds of archives in the places where your ancestors lived. Here is actually one of the doors in my county archive where I work. So another type of archive could be a historical society or a genealogical society. If they have a building with records that they're collecting and preserving, they are a type of archive. Some areas may have one or both societies, and I've also seen where they've put them together and have a historical genealogical society. But if they're collecting records and preserving them and making them available to the public, they are an archive, so we should be using these. They do collect and preserve historical and genealogical records. They're a fantastic place to find knowledge about a local area or local families that may not be in a record. So seek out the members in these societies, because if they were born and raised there, if they've lived there a long time, or they've studied the local history, they're going to have a lot more information and helpful tips for you that are not written in the county records. So reach out to a society, maybe even become a member of the society if your family is from there. And so always reach out to the societies. They are a wealth of information. Here's actually a photograph that we have from our archives that was donated to us by our local historical society. They have photographs. They have documents. So reach out to them. Another type of archive are public libraries. I find genealogists kind of overlook public libraries in some areas because they think they don't have any genealogical materials. They have books to check out, but they also have genealogy rooms. They have sections in their libraries that contain genealogical records. So we need to be using our public libraries. Our public libraries also have computers. And on these computers, you could probably access other data collections of records. So always look for any kind of place where you can find records. Public libraries could also have what are called special collection sections. Now, these special collections could be any kind of records. They could just be a collection of reference materials, genealogical reference materials, but they could also be a collection of what we call loose papers that are documents, old letters. They could have diaries, scrapbooks, things like that in their special collection. So knowing the lingo sometimes helps you. So we need to look at these public libraries for genealogy information. This is a photo that I took from the Harvey Brown Genealogy Room. It's in Montgomery County, Tennessee. This wall here is filled with genealogical reference materials, but they also have their microfilm is in this particular area of the library, which has their microfilm newspapers and things like that. And so always check with the public library in that area. State archives. I love state archives. They're one of my favorite places to do research. I like to say that these are like mega archives. All 50 U.S. states have a state archives, and all 50 state archives have a website presence. So we need to be using these. They contain records from across the state. Sometimes I think genealogists think that the state archives only has the state capital records or just the county or the state government records, which they do. They do have the state government records, but they have so much more. They could have those county government records that you're looking for. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, if this county has a county archive, why are those records at the state level? Well, you need to think back. Think back to the fact that maybe that county didn't have an archive at a particular time. They needed to find a place to put their county records, and they sent them to the state archives. So that's how those records may have gotten there. State archives also collect and preserve historical records and genealogical records. And of course, they have artifacts there as well. So look to those state archives, whatever state in the United States your ancestors lived, look to those state archives to see if you can't find information about your ancestors. And I also put a plug in for state archives because this is where records preservation and conservation takes place. So if you have a damaged document or something that you think needs some work, reach out to a state archives. They may have a conservator on staff that may can give you some advice. This is my home away from home. This is the Tennessee State Library and Archives. This is actually a brand new building. It's not even 2 years old yet. And so it is a fantastic place. If you have Tennessee ancestors, I would highly encourage you to make a trip here and look at the wonderful records that are in this particular archive. I was just there a couple of weeks ago, and a fantastic place. Some other archives that genealogists I find kind of either overlook or don't even think about are university, college, libraries, and archives. Our universities and colleges have these library and archives on their campuses. Many times they have more than one. And so they first and foremost are going to archive the college records and the student records. So if you have ancestors that did attend university or college, contact them, see if they have surviving records. But did you know that they also collect and house local historical and genealogical records? And the reason they do that is because they are part of the community. And so many times these records are donated to them by local families, local businesses, local organizations when there's no place else for them to go. I know that there is a college near me that has an archives where they have diaries from the Civil War era. And so we need to be looking at these libraries and archives for our ancestors as well. Just like any other archive, they will receive donations of these records from individuals, maybe from an organization, a civic group, a social group, things like that. And these archives and libraries are on their campuses. And for the most part, you should, even though you are not going to college there, should be able to access these libraries and archives on these campuses. This is a photograph that I took of the Pogue Library at Murray State University in Kentucky. I've done research at this particular university library many times because I live not too far from the Kentucky border, and that's where Murray State is. Fantastic library. But Murray State has 5 libraries on their campus, and they are all have different records in them. And so I would encourage you to, if you haven't, look at the university and colleges in the areas where your ancestors live. Contact them, talk to them, visit them, see if they have some records that might help you. Museums. These are another type of archive. I actually came late to the idea of using museums for genealogy research. They have exhibits and displays in their facilities, as you know, if you've ever been to a museum. But I like to say they have a front room and a back room. That front room is their exhibits, their displays, the things that we walk through and look at. But their back room, believe it or not, look just like any other archive. They have shelves full of boxes full of records. So if you look on a display or an exhibit and you see a Civil War letter, well, there may be more where that came from in the back room. Or if you see a photograph, maybe you might even find your ancestor's photograph on display somewhere. There's more where that came from. One of the things about museums that might be a little more difficult than other archives is that it's a little more difficult to actually gain access and do research. But if you develop a rapport, develop a relationship with the museum curators, they may let you have access to those records. And so you may find archive records in those back rooms that are not on display that could help you advance your genealogy research. This is one of my favorite museums. This is the Williamson County, Tennessee Museum and Archives. They have displays just like this one all throughout their archives or all throughout their museum. But they have that back room that has boxes of records and photographs and other artifacts just like this. Church archives. If you've thought about researching your ancestors' church affiliation and church history, fantastic to do that. They're usually organized by denomination or type of religion. These records are from the local church and could be collected and in one facility. Maybe the individual churches still have their records at their church. I have found that. And believe it or not, those pastors, church leaders, Sunday school teachers may have taken some records home. And why I put that one in there is because as an archivist, I had the experience of having some records donated from a particular family. And the family member actually was a Sunday school teacher at a local Methodist church. And as I was going through these boxes of records, I found that she had Sunday school registers. And so you never know where you're going to find these records. So church archives are a fantastic place. And one of the examples I like to give is this one. This is the historical foundation of the Cumberland Presbyterian Church and the Cumberland Presbyterian Church in America. It's actually located in Cordova, Tennessee, which is just outside of Memphis, Tennessee. The archivist there is Susan Knight Gore. Now, you may think to yourself, well, I have Cumberland Presbyterian ancestors, but none of them lived in Tennessee. Well, what you don't know is that these archivists will travel from church to church, state to state, picking up records, and then they bring those records back to these church archives. And so just because it's in Tennessee doesn't necessarily mean they don't have records for your ancestors. If they were part of this particular denomination, I would highly encourage you to reach out to them or to reach out to another church archive of any other denomination. Regional archives. These are some archives that are very special. They are archives that encompass more than one region. Either a region in a country, region in states, things like that. They highlight a particular culture in that particular region. So that means that it could encompass more than one United States, or it could encompass pieces of those states. So regional archives are a way to learn about that culture, how your ancestors lived. And one of the best ones that I know of is the Archives of the Appalachia. It is located at the East Tennessee State University. They have records and information about that culture, the Appalachian region. And if you've ever known about the Appalachian region or visited, you know that it encompasses more than just parts of Tennessee. So this is an example of an archive that you should be researching in if you have ancestors in this particular area. And the last one, before we get to dig deep into the MyHeritage and archive aspect, is ethnic archives. These are fantastic learning centers. They collect and preserve records for a particular race of people. And we have several of these, not only across the United States, but across the globe. They concentrate on the lives and the culture and the history of a particular ethnic group. And again, they are a learning center for diverse groups of people that are found in our lineage, and we should be researching that lineage, that aspect of our ancestors. A couple that I would like to share with you this is the first one, Museum of the Cherokee Indian, which is in Cherokee, North Carolina. A great place to go if you have Cherokee ancestry. But one of my favorites and one that I cannot wait to go visit because I haven't visited yet is this one. This is the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. I could be wrong, but I think it's one of our newest ethnic archives and museums. I have heard fantastic things about this particular archives and museum, and I'm hopefully going to be visiting it in the next year or so. So those are types of archives, and I hope that I have shown you one that you haven't thought about using. And so maybe it'll get you out there to start using all these different kinds of archives. There's no way I could tell you about all the different kinds of archives. There's just so many out there. But did you know that you have your own personal genealogy archive? I do a presentation called The Home Archivist, and all of us who are genealogists that collect and preserve records are just that. We're home archivists, and so we have our own personal genealogy archive. So most genealogists have this particular archive. You may not have realized that you had that, but you do. And so your personal genealogy archive could have photographs. It definitely is going to have some documents. It could have old letters, diaries, newspaper clippings, scrapbooks, and even those family heirloom artifacts such as grandma's quilt, the family Bible. Maybe you have a lock of hair from one of your ancestors. And so this is an archive. This is things that I, as an archivist, work with on a daily basis. And so that's why I try to teach genealogists how to take care of their family archive, but to also appreciate the fact that you have these things in your archive. Here's an example of a family archive. Yours may look very similar to this. This is the Lyle Family Records collection that was donated to the archives where I work. And if you look at this photograph very closely, you'll see lots of different types of records. The book there in the foreground that's to the right is a ledger book. The Lyle family owned a local mercantile, so that's a ledger book. There's scrapbooks, there's newspaper clippings, photographs, all kinds of different things in this particular collection. And so this is what I consider a family archive. None of this is online or digitized yet, and much of what you have is also probably not online or digitized. Here's another example from my family. This is my grandmother's Bible. I inherited this Bible when she passed away. Her name was Ida Catherine Drummond was her maiden name, and her married name was Bartram. But inside her Bible, many of you may recognize this, she stuck a lot of things inside of her Bible. She put notes, she put letters, she put photographs, she put obituaries, she put funeral cards. And so what a treasure trove to find. And I was able to document these things and add them to my genealogy research. So much of what you have in your personal genealogy archive may not be online, which tells you there's a lot of genealogists out there that have the same thing, and it's not online. But there are archived records available at MyHeritage that you can add to your personal genealogy archive. I like to say that we don't need to leave any record source unsearched. At first, you have to know about the record source, don't you? But then, if you know about it, you need to search it, and you need to search it pretty thoroughly. So I'm going to be telling you about particular record sources on MyHeritage that for me is reminiscent or looks a lot like an archived record source. And so that's why I went through what is an archive, your personal archive, because now we're going to talk about the record sources on MyHeritage. Now, obviously, I can't talk about all of them. We don't have enough time for that. But we're going to talk about several that I hope it will be a light bulb over your head telling you, hey, I need to get back on MyHeritage and look at these records. So we're going to look at MyHeritage. This is the main page. I actually signed in under my account, and this is the main page. Now, this is not going to be a step-by-step how to navigate MyHeritage. There are already webinars that you can go and listen to. I put some of those in my handout, but this is going to be more of showing you specific collections. So first we're going to look at the collection catalog. The archives collection catalog that we see at any other archives is pretty similar. The archives collection catalog contains descriptions of records collections that the archives has available for us as genealogists to do research in. They contain finding aids, indexes, and even digital records. The archives collection catalog actually allows you to explore in the main collection of records that archives have. But you can also browse. There's a difference between searching and browsing. And so you can do both a lot of times in an archives collection catalog. And thankfully, a lot of our archives are putting their collection catalog online. There are always new collections of records being added to the catalog. I was just looking this morning at a local county archive that's just north of me, and they were on their social media pages talking about how they had just added some collections, some digitized collections to their catalog. So we always need to be aware that we need to stay up to date with these particular archives and repositories that have the records where our ancestors lived. Because many times you may have been there, and it may have been a while since you've been there, but they may have added more records that they've digitized, more records that they've indexed. Maybe they have received donations of records since you were there. And so we always need to be checking back to see what they have that's new. So let's look at the MyHeritage collection catalog. The MyHeritage collection catalog allows a researcher to explore the main collection of records on MyHeritage. That seems pretty straightforward. The collection catalog allows the researcher to also browse through specific records collections. The collection catalog is actually the place that I always go, first and foremost. The collection catalog is very similar to an archives collection catalog, and it will help you to find the records that are available on the MyHeritage website. It's much easier to navigate for me when I go to the collection catalog. And so you need to also check the collection catalog on MyHeritage often to find new collections. Just like an archives collection catalog, MyHeritage is constantly adding new collections. And so you need to check back often. Maybe even get on their email list when they send out emails talking about new collections that they have added, because there's always new stuff coming online all the time. So we're back on the main page, and so I am going to show you a little bit of how to get to the collection catalog. And you can see the red arrow. You're going to see a word that says research. So you're going to click on that, and it's going to bring a drop-down menu. Now, weirdly enough, I could not get a screenshot of the drop-down menu without it going away. So this is actually, I took this with my phone. So you're going to see collection catalog in the drop-down menu, and you will just click on that, and it will bring you to this page. Now, this page actually goes on and on and on, because the collection catalog, if you will look how many records collections that they have. And so, fantastic. You could go up to the search bar and put in a surname, and you could also put in a term if you wanted to. So I put in the surname Brown. Pretty straightforward, a very common name, Brown. And then there on the left, you see some of the collections where Brown is found, and then it lists some of the collections. 38 collections, to be exact, for Brown. And I actually went into some of these collections to see just what kinds of records I could find. There's a city directory. This is an actual digitized city directory that you can find online at MyHeritage. And so it lists the Browns in, this is Mason City, Iowa, city directory from 1930. And like I said, this is not an index. This is the actual city directory that's been digitized. I also found this. This is a transcription of parish registers of Bradfield, Yorkshire, England, published in 1905. It's marriages, it's weddings from the years 1699 and 1700. And there's Joseph Brown and Elizabeth Abel, married April the 1st of 1700. So fantastic records that you can find searching by a surname. Well, what if we want to search by term? And so I put in diary. And when you put in diary, you get 18 collections that have the word diary, as you can see right there. Now, I don't know about you, but I would love to find a diary of my ancestor. My family did not leave a lot of things like diaries and scrapbooks and things like that for me as a genealogist. And so I find myself searching for these items in archives. So I went to look at some of these results, and this is one of them. This is the transcription of the diary of William Owen from November the 10th, 1824 to April the 20th, 1825. This was actually published in the Indiana Historical Society Publications, Volume 4, and it was published in 1895. So you can read some of the entries here and maybe saying, well, but William Owen isn't my ancestor, so I wouldn't be interested in his diary. One of the things that I would like to encourage you when it comes to things like diaries and scrapbooks, even if you can't find a diary or a scrapbook or even old letters in an archive for your particular ancestors, read the other people's that are in that community diaries, scrapbooks, and old letters. Read the neighbor's mail, so to speak, because they may mention your ancestor. And so one of the things that I did when I saw this is I thought, well, I wonder whom else was mentioned by Mr. William Owen in his diary. So I put a red underline under the names of others in his diary. And look who we have here. We have a Mrs. Rapp. We have a Judge Blackford. We have a Captain McDonald, and a Mr. Hood and a Mrs. Wood. So reading other people's diaries, looking at other people's scrapbooks and old letters, you may find your ancestors that way. It's not quite as easy as reading if you had a diary for your ancestor, but if you're like me and you have some ancestors that literally, seemingly were not mentioned in much of any kind of record, if I were to find something like this, I would be ecstatic. So let's look at some digitized records. I don't know about you, but I'm always looking for digitized records. And I can tell you as an archivist and in the archives profession, archives world, digitizing records is first and foremost on everybody's list of things to do at their archives. In fact, when we apply for grants to get money to help us with our archives, one of the requirements a lot of times is that the product has to be something digitized and available online. And so digitization is happening every single day with more records coming online. But again, there's still a lot of records in those archives. But genealogists are always looking for those digitized records, aren't we? We want to see it online. Many types of records are being digitized and made available online every day. I mean, they're coming online fast and furious. MyHeritage, I believe, is actually on the forefront of the digitized records that they're doing. They have digitized records, photographs, newspapers, vital records, and really so much more. It's hard to list it all. So we're going to go back to our main page to look for these digitized records. And you're going to click on Research again. You're going to click on Collection Catalog again. And then I want you to look over to the left there and you see all collections. These are the collections of records that are on MyHeritage, and many of these have digital records with them. And so you have things like histories, memories, and biographies, schools and universities, public records, directories, guides, and references, maps, family trees, birth, marriage, and death, which are vital records, military records, and then you can see the rest of it there. What I want you to see is the list there. It starts with MyHeritage family trees. If you look down at the bottom, you see U.S. city directories, and it has the word images. That's going to tell you that they actually have digitized images, and I already showed you a city directory image. But you can also see when these collections were last updated. And the My Family Heritage trees have been updated as soon as January 22nd, and so you can see when all these were updated. So here's a list of those record collections that we can look for to see if they have the actual digitized records. And so I thought I would show you some of the ones that I found. I picked maps. I don't know about you, but I love maps. I'm not very good at reading maps. I can get lost in a box with directions, actually. But I love looking at maps, especially if they are showing streets where my ancestors lived, showing maybe even the properties that they owned. So maps are something that I really like to look at. So I went to maps and I looked to see what kind of maps were there. And this is just an example. This is the map of Westchester County, New York. It was published in 1914. And so a fantastic digitized map that you can access on MyHeritage from home. Also, I went to the birth, marriage, and death records. These are our vital records. This is those records that all genealogists try to find for our ancestors. And I know that they have a lot of international records, a lot of records that are not U.S. centric on MyHeritage. And I have French ancestry. My maiden name is Leemaster, and I've always known it was French. And I knew that my 8th great-grandfather's name was Abraham. Now, when he came to the United States, they spelled it differently back then. You can see the spelling there at the bottom. Over time, it became, I guess, Americanized. And so we spell it, what you see in the parentheses. So I thought, well, I'll search for my 8th great-grandfather. This is not him, but I wanted to show you this actual digitized record. It's in French, which I cannot read, but this is the birth or baptism of Jack, I say Jack, but Abraham Leemaster, February 27th, 1749. They have digitized records back to the 1700s. And these are church baptisms and civil births. And I've got the red arrow pointing to the actual text. And like I said, I cannot read French, but I wanted to show you this wonderful, wonderful digitized record. But I kept looking, and I found this. Now, this is dated 1636, 1635. And if you look at it, you're going to say, Melissa, that was not done in the 1600s. And then you're right. This is actually a transcription of the original record. Again, it's in French. This is the baptism of my 8th great-grandfather. This is the only ancestor that I've been able to track across the pond, as we like to say. And he was baptized at St. Mary's Parish, Jersey, off the Channel Islands, off the coast of France. And so I actually had to get someone to translate this for me. And so here is a blow-up of that. You can see the actual text. And what it says is that Abraham, son of Jean Leemaster and of Sarah, his wife, being baptized the 16th day of the month and year said, and then it gives the names of the witnesses who were there. And so a fantastic document. I treasure it, and it is from 1636. And these records are digitized on MyHeritage. Photographs. How many of us are looking for photographs? I can tell you that archives, that's one of the collections that they do try to have in every archive are photographs, whether it's photographs of people, photographs of the local buildings, local churches, local schools. Photographs are a huge and wonderful visual history that we are all looking for. Unfortunately, I don't have a tremendous amount of photographs of my ancestors because there have been house fires and things that have happened that, that there are just no photographs. I'm hoping that they will show up at different archives, or maybe some family members will find them, but I continually look for them. So archives have lots of photographs, and believe it or not, these archives have a lot of photographs that are unidentified. And so I would encourage you that as you research photographs or research at archives, if you have a lot of family photographs, maybe share those with the local archive or look at their unidentified photographs, and maybe you can help them to identify them. I can tell you today, actually, this morning, I was actually at work at the archives, and I had someone come in to donate something, and I was showing them a photograph that we had been working on to try to identify. And when they saw the photograph, they knew immediately who it was, and they were able to identify it for us. And so that is a huge help to us as archivists. So most of all photographs that are going to be in archives are usually donated by the public. Archives don't normally generate photographs of their own, so they have to rely on the public, families, businesses, civic organizations, social organizations to donate documents, photographs, and things like that to add to their collections. And so these photographs normally come from the public. Similarly, MyHeritage has photographs available for researchers, and they're fantastic. I've seen so many of them. And again, the majority of these photographs have been shared by the public on their public family trees. So we're back at the home page. We're going to go find some photographs. And again, click on the research there, and you're going to get that drop-down menu again. We're going to go to the collection catalog, and there is a button for photos. And so you're going to click on photos, and it's going to bring this page up for you. Now, I want us to stop and look at this page for just a minute. When I saw the listing over there on the far right of number of records for the MyHeritage photos and documents. That is 500 million. When I first looked at it, I thought, well, that's 500,000. That's pretty cool. And then I looked again. I said, wait a minute. No, Melissa, that is million. And it was just recently updated. So, and it says images, which means there are images there. That's what we want, isn't it? We want to see the images. MyHeritage photos and documents, photos and images. This is where you're going to click to go to those. And this is the page you're going to be sent to. So you can search by surname. You can search by place. You can put the year in, or even search by keyword. I encourage you to use this aspect of MyHeritage because you're going to find some wonderful treasures. I actually searched for one of my husband's ancestors this time. This is his third great-grandfather, George Washington Stringfield. He was quite a card, actually, in his time. And I wanted to see if I could find a photograph of him. I actually have a photograph of him, and I just wondered if the same photograph was out there. So I did a search for him, and I found this photograph. This is actually the photograph that I do have, and this is George Washington Stringfield's family. This particular photograph is actually from my personal genealogy archive, and it is located on MyHeritage family tree that I have put on MyHeritage. This is actually his second family. The lady there holding the baby is his second wife. And before he married her, she was actually his stepdaughter. So there is a whole story there of that. But so this is a wonderful photograph of the family. George Washington Stringfield is actually one of my favorite people to research because of his early antics and of how he died. He was actually shot and killed. But the gentleman who shot and killed him never served time, was never brought up on charges because they said it was self-defense. So I won't go into the huge story, but this is a fantastic photograph because it is only one of two photographs of George Washington Stringfield. And there's only the two of the children that are in this photograph. There are no other photographs of them. And so a great photograph to have. And it is on MyHeritage family trees. This is also another photograph that I have. This is Sarah Elizabeth Barker Moran. This is my husband's third great aunt, actually. And it's also on the MyHeritage family tree photographs, on my family tree photographs. It's the only known photograph of Miss Sarah Elizabeth. And it is on MyHeritage for anybody and everybody to use. I hope that they download it and use it in their own genealogy because I like to share my ancestry with those that are also researching my family. You can find documents on these trees as well. This one is not actually one of my documents. It's one that I found on a tree. It's from Mary Barker Gurr Pendleton. This is her death certificate. She was born in 1862. She died in 1947. And again, this is on a family tree on MyHeritage. And so we need to be using these family trees to our benefit. And yes, I agree. Not everything on family trees anywhere is totally correct. But you know what? I use them still because they give me avenues of research. I see documents, I see photographs, and then I take those and I will take the information and I will conduct my own research. But I also reach out to those that have these trees, and I have made some cousin connections, and we've swapped information, and we've swapped records and photographs. So a great community, these family trees. So let's talk a bit about family group sheets and family trees. You can actually find family group sheets and family trees at local archives, historical societies, all of those different archives that I talked to you about. I encourage genealogists to donate family group sheets or family trees to the local archive where your ancestors lived. Because if you put that in that archive and another researcher comes behind you and finds it, hopefully you've put your contact information on there and they can contact you and you can make a connection and share more information. But MyHeritage has these as well. So many archives collect these types of records as well. They usually will come from genealogists who have produced these. And so you might go to a vertical file and find a family group sheet or a family tree, a family history as well. These are usually found in vertical files or manuscript collections. I am asked all the time about manuscript collections. What exactly is a manuscript collection? Well, you remember earlier I showed you a picture of the Lyle family records collection. That is a manuscript collection. Now, in Canada and Europe, these collections are sometimes called Fonds collections. And so look for that when you're researching in another country, that FONDS, Fonds collections. MyHeritage also offers public family trees. They're fantastic. They have great information on them. Again, we need to use them as stepping stones. Don't believe everything you see on any family tree anywhere. You need to do your own research and verify the information. But anyone can create a family tree on MyHeritage. And so building your family tree, a public family tree, I think is a fantastic idea. I have made so many connections and have been able to advance my genealogy research through putting my family tree on for public people to see. I only put on there the information that I've been able to verify. That's just for me. And I put photographs and documents on there for others to use and enjoy. I like to share, and so I put all that on there. If you don't want people to use what is on your family tree, then just don't put it on there. That's an easy rule to follow. But I like to share, so I like to put all of those documents in and share those photographs with other people who are researching, the same people that I am. So let's go back to the main page again, and we're going to click on Research, and we're going to click on Family Trees this time. And we're going to go to this page. This is Family Trees, and you can search by a name, obviously, a birth year, birthplace, and a death year, death place, marriage. You can also search by the marriage. So I search for George Washington Stringfield, my husband's third great-grandfather, the one I just showed you the photograph of, to see who else may have a family tree for him out there. And there were several. Now, there's 835 results for George Washington Stringfield. Obviously, not all of those family trees are going to be the correct George Washington Stringfield, because I know that there were 2 or 3 of the same time period that he lived, but this is the one. And as you can see little snippets of that particular photograph that I showed you. And so I have gone to these family trees. I have reached out to the researchers, the ones who have put up these trees, to make a connection with them, to see if they have even more information that I don't have. Because a lot of people are putting things on their family trees that I didn't have, and I may have things that they didn't have. And so it's always a great idea to do that. So the MyHeritage personal family tree, you can always get there from going to Family Tree on the main page, as I'm showing you there. And then you go to My Tree. This is where you can build your own tree and look at your tree. And I think MyHeritage has some fantastic aspects of your family tree that you can use. So let's look at some family tree views. I know that a lot of people are asking about different ways that you can view your family tree. So when you get to your family tree, up on the right, you're going to see some icons there where you can change different ways to view your family tree. Now, this particular way, this is called the family view. There's also the pedigree view, the fan view, and the list view. I prefer the family view because that's just what I am partial to. And so, as you can see, part of it there. But here is my parents are at the bottom. My father's parents, and then my great-grandparents. You can see them as well. But this is the family view. This is how I personally enjoy looking at a tree, is this way. You may prefer a different way. That's why it's great to have options. This is the pedigree view. As you can see, it's a little bit different, and it shows it in a different way. It goes from left to right this way. And this is a great view. If you like the pedigree view, then you can choose this option for your tree. And here's the fan view, and MyHeritage offers this fantastic fan view. It's very easy to understand. And if you prefer looking at your family tree in this method or this view, it's available for you to use. And then the list view. Now, you may see that marked out black part right there. I could not get a list view without it including my brother, and my brother is still living. And so it's important to know that you should not be sharing living person's information with those without their permission, obviously. But I didn't want to put that up there because I had not talked to him about it. But the list view is just that, a list view. And so it has my mom and my dad, my grandparents, my dad's parents there. And so different views. We always are looking for genealogy, family trees, charts, and things like that to print. And MyHeritage gives you that option. They give you several options to put your family tree in that you can actually print and use or just download. I want to talk about newspaper collections. I am a huge, huge advocate of newspapers, and I'm a huge advocate of reading the entire newspaper. I find many genealogists will just go to a place, search for an obituary, and they're done. They think, oh, I've gotten everything out of the newspaper that I need. I have found more information in newspapers than I have really any other source. And so newspapers are one of the best genealogical resources we can use, and we should be using them. Newspapers have more than just obituaries. Yes, we need to go and get the obituaries. Newspapers actually have so much more that we can find. Now, you may find a newspaper collection at an archive either on microfilm. You may even find them in bound volumes. I don't know if you've ever seen a bound volume where they've taken like a whole year's worth of newspapers and actually bound them in books. Or you may find original copies of the newspaper at an archive. Oh, this is an example of a bound volume. We have some bound volumes in the archive where I work. They're very large books. They hold an entire year of newspapers. Our newspaper was only a once-a-week newspaper, so it's not that big of a bound volume. But you may find newspapers in this manner. MyHeritage has a large database of newspapers from around the world. And so you need to be using those on MyHeritage. So how do we get to the newspapers? We go back to our main page. We click on research. Again, we get the drop-down menu, and you're going to see newspapers. It's right there, very easy to find. And you're going to come to this screen. And again, you can search by name. You can actually search by publication title, the name of the newspaper, and then publication date and the place where the newspaper was published. Now, this is the page you're going to come to once you at the bottom, and it says notable collections in this category. But I also want you to notice it says view all, because this is not all. As you can see, under newspaper name index USA and Canada, 2 billion records, not million, but billion. They have France newspapers and periodicals, Australian newspapers. They have Chronicling America. They are Pennsylvania newspapers, Canadian newspapers. And again, this is not all. If you click the view all, you'll get a whole list of over 2 billion records. So go use MyHeritage newspaper database. It is phenomenal. You can actually use the search bar there. You can search by surname or something else that you can find in the newspaper. I searched for my third great-grandfather. This is my father's grandfather. And I knew about this incident because I have researched it years ago, but I was able to find a newspaper item. His name is Fenton Clark Lemaster, and he unfortunately suffered a very horrible elevator accident at his place of work. And this was published in the Parkersburg Sentinel newspaper, February the 9th, 1914. So, fantastic newspaper article. Now, one of the things that I want to encourage you to look for are very unusual things in newspapers. I found something in a newspaper that I was quite surprised by. I had always seen these medicine advertisements, and I'd read them, people saying that they were cured or this helped them, that helped them. And I always thought the people mentioned in these things were made up, were not real people. But I have actually found one for someone who is in my husband's family. Mrs. Catherine Burnine, who was the wife of James M. Burnine, who was in my husband's lineage, is actually touting how wonderful this rheumatism cure is. And it's from the Times newspaper from Trenton, New Jersey, December 30th, 1890. And so I found it very interesting that this is a real person. I know who she is, and she's in one of these advertisements. So that's why I tell genealogists to read the whole newspaper. This particular article did come up in the search, but sometimes not everything comes up in a search. So that's why it's important to read those newspapers. So it's not all online, but MyHeritage truly does have some fantastic databases, and that's why we need to use it for our own personal archive. So genealogists should be using a mixture of online resources and sources found in local archives. We need to tell our ancestor's story. I'm one of those that I want to know everything about my ancestor. I want to know what they had for breakfast. I want to know what their hobbies were. And so just finding out their birth, marriage, and death dates is not enough for me. And so I use resources like MyHeritage and the records that are at archives to help me tell the story. We need to travel to those archives if we can. If you can't travel, that's okay too. MyHeritage has got you covered, or you can email those archives. You can give them a phone call, contact them through their social media pages, but find out where the records are and try to get access to those records, or at least get them to send you copies. So contact those archives because they're very willing to work with you. Go on the MyHeritage website, use those databases, dig into those databases. Don't just use the search engine and just kind of skim through. Dig down like you do at any other archive and use it to its utmost ability. Do not discount these databases like MyHeritage, especially their family trees, their newspaper sources, those digitized records that they have. They are part of the genealogy process, and you may be very surprised by what you can find there. Thank you very much for attending this presentation. Please visit my blog, A Genealogist in the Archives, and you can find me on Facebook. Just look for The Archive Lady. And if you have any questions later on, please email me. Here's my email address. It's also on the handout. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Marianne for any questions that we may have.
Okay, don't get rid of that email address yet, Melissa, because I am going to type it in here for our audience. There we go. All right, great. Okay, we'll give you a break for a few minutes. Melissa will do the announcements and the door prizes. We'll bring you right back on for the Q&A. I've got a whole bunch of questions. And our next MyHeritage webinar will be Family Statistics on MyHeritage by Yuri Gonin, and that will be in 2 weeks. Our next thing, we're going to hand out our first door prize, and this door prize is a 1-year MyHeritage complete plan. So this gives you access to everything at MyHeritage. It's like their best plan. And so there's two sides of this. There's the family site, which you see here, and that gives you unlimited capacity to build your family tree, and you have Family Tree Builder Premium, and you can contact other site managers, all sorts of stuff. And then the other side of it is what Melissa was showing you today, the subscription, the historical records, so the newspapers, the photos, all that other stuff. 13.3 billion historical records. So you get everything with this MyHeritage Complete Plan. Okay, now to pick a door prize winner for this. And that is going to go to Robert Carney. So congratulations, Robert. Just going to write down your name. All right. And then our next door prize is a MyHeritage DNA test kit. And the DNA test kit also has two sides. So on the one side, what you'll get are ethnicity results that will tell you your heritage, where your people have traditionally come from. And then the other side will be the DNA matches, the people who share DNA with you. And sometimes that can help break down brick walls. So it's a good thing to check those matches and try and figure out how they connect to you. And we need to pick somebody for this prize. And let's see, that's going to go out to Tom Sibley. So congratulations, Tom. All right, so for Robert and for Tom, I will be emailing you after the webinar is over because I do need specific information from you in order for MyHeritage to get you these prizes. So be on the lookout for those emails. All right, let's bring Melissa back. The first question here. Sharon wants to know, are state archives always located in state capitals? Good question.
That is a good question. And to be honest with you, I don't know. I can't answer for all 50 states. I know that the one in Tennessee is at the state capitol, and I know that the one in Kentucky is.
And the one in Massachusetts is too.
Okay. So, but I could not answer for all 50 states. So I'll tell you what, though, they're very easy to find online. They all have a website. And so if you'll just Google it, you can find it.
Yeah, I mean, just put the state and the name of the state, like Florida State Archives, and Google it, and you'll come right to it no matter where it is. And that's going to work also, in Canada for provinces, and,
yes.
It's going to work in most countries, English-speaking countries anyways. All right. The next question, Michelle is asking, is it possible to search museum holdings? Is there a central database for museum holdings? And that's actually a really interesting question because we have like WorldCat and Archive Grid. Is there something for museums?
A lot of I'm glad you brought that up because Archive Grid and WorldCat, and there's also Internet Archive. All three of those are actually, I would say, I call them not user contributed, but they're contributed to by archives and museums and libraries. They contribute their information to those websites. And so I have seen museums on Archive Grid. And so you might want to check that.
Yeah, I know. I'm not talking specifically now about museums, but like in my local area and at my local historical society and in towns around me, the historical societies can partner with Archive Grid to scan their stuff and get it online. And then they have a collection online. So that's a pretty cool thing. So you might not even realize that local places around you will have collections up on archive.org.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Great question. Nicholas wants to know, are there similar archives in Europe, especially Italy?
I have never done Italian research. I do know that I wouldn't say most, but many, many countries have archives. They may not have county archives or things like that, but they will have archives that archive the local government records. I know that a lot of European countries have church archives, whether they're at that church or they have a separate archive. And so, again, you would just need to Google's your friend. I like to say Google's your friend. And so you can Google it, Cindy's List. You might go to Cindy's List and look and see what she has there for other countries.
Good point. I will Google Cindy's List and put it in the...
Yeah. And she's a real person.
Yeah. And I just want to add to what Melissa was saying in that like most countries have a national archives. So at least start there, Poland National Archives or Italian National Archives. And maybe from there, they'll show you the structure of how it works in that country. I don't know that for sure, but, most countries do have a national archives.
And I'll also add that if you go on MyHeritage and if you're searching in a lot of those databases and if you look at the source citations of where these records came from, sometimes it will list the repository and it may be in another country.
Nice. Yeah. Good point. All right. Brenda wants to know, what is the best way to preserve newspapers?
Newspapers are very acidic. And so first and foremost, you don't want them to touch anything else if you're going to store them. Do not store them with anything else. So if you have, depending on what you have, newspaper clippings, or if you have a whole newspaper, there are archival stores online that you can purchase sleeves, archival sleeves. You can put the newspaper clippings in, or if it's a whole newspaper, they actually have large sleeves for things like that. The main thing is that you don't want them to touch anything else because they will leave a yellowy orange stain on anything that they touch, and to keep them in a cool, dark, and dry place.
Newspapers are so tricky because they're such an awkward size.
Yes, they are.
I wish that there was like a local place that you could go and scan old newspapers. Because like most of us don't have scanners at home that are big enough. Not easily.
That's true. That's true. I don't know if I don't want to name any names maybe, but some of those local copy places, I don't know if they have large scanners like that.
I mean, at your archives, how do you guys scan the newspapers or do you just preserve them?
We preserve them, actually, and there are scanners that we can use that are large enough.
Okay.
They're very expensive, so not all archives can afford to have them, but yeah, there are.
Okay.
And we also use, my setup that I have is, we have, what we call it, they're called, they're LED camera stands that have LED lights, and you put your camera above, and then you lay the large book or a newspaper or whatever below, and you take digital photographs.
Oh, okay. That's a good idea. Yeah, that would work. Good thought. Stephen wants to know, are donated photographs copyrighted?
Well, what happens in an archive is when you donate something to me, I have you sign what is called a deed of gift. A deed of gift is a document that transfers the ownership from you to my archive. So that means the copyright transfers from you to whoever you're donating it to if you sign a deed of gift. So that's something that you're agreeing to. And so once you've signed that and we get those photographs, they now belong to that archive and they own the copyright.
So what about when somebody donates, say, a book or a photograph done by a studio that's more recent and is not in public domain yet?
Correct. That's when it starts to get kind of tricky. You need to look at the publication date of the book, because after we go back so far, there is no copyright. The copyright goes out. But it's always best practice to contact the publisher to see if there's any copyright issues.
Yeah, it's like when you use the Library of Congress website, there's loads of photographs in the Library of Congress, and the first thing I do is I go look at the copyright information, and they'll tell you right there, no restrictions, or, this might be under copyright, so I think those places are usually, if they have a field for it on their website, they're usually pretty good about telling you.
And another place you can find that information in an archive is that if it's most likely it's going to be part of a manuscript collection. And the most important part of a manuscript collection is the finding aid, and that's a document that's produced by the archivist as they process the collection. And one little piece in that finding aid is about the copyright, and it will tell you whether or not there's anything in that collection that is copyrighted.
Okay. In addition to copyright, Sharon wants to know, is there any kind of privacy issue when it comes to displaying or donating records or photos, especially if potentially some of the people are still living?
Actually, no. If they were your photographs, you took the photographs and you donated them, there's no issue.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Sandra is saying, Melissa, we share LeMaster ancestors.
Fantastic.
So
drop me an email. Maybe we can make a connection.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay. Mary Sue says, if I have a family diary, how do I find an archive to donate it? Would you donate where the person lived or where the book of the family lived?
I would donate it wherever the person was living when they wrote the diary. Okay. Because a lot of times archives in the area where the diary was written, meaning that person probably was writing about local events, local things that happened, local people. I would think that a local archive would like to have that diary because it's not only about the person who wrote it, but it's about who and what they wrote about.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Robin asks, are the photos we add to our MyHeritage trees extracted by MyHeritage to put into their photo collection?
That question I cannot answer. I'm not an expert in the MyHeritage website. I was just yeah, I can't
Okay.
answer that question.
I think I can answer that question.
Good.
There are privacy settings in the MyHeritage trees, and you determine if something is private or public. So you can change those settings. So if you make something private, nobody else will be able to see it. Or if you want to share something, then you make it public.
And that's good to know. And I did not mention it in my presentation, but one of the rules that I follow for myself is that on any public family tree, if I find an original document, such as a letter or something that belongs to the person who put up that family tree, or a photograph, I always reach out to that person regardless and ask them for permission to add it to my genealogy.
Interesting. Because how it works on these sites, once it's public, anybody can just sort of add it to their tree. Right. So
yeah, I kind of go the extra mile on that because, not that, I know I can go and get it, but I don't know. I just kind of want to be nice that way.
Yeah. And I don't share something publicly outside of the environment that I got it from without asking. Yeah.
Exactly.
Plus, it's always a nice way to sort of open up dialogue with
that's right.
the person, and they'll like you for asking. So it's a good way to start. Okay, Alan has an interesting question here. He says, do you have a preferred way to lock info for a person that you have verified so it will not get changed, or so you don't have to remember when doing smart matches and instant matches? And that's a fair point, Alan. I get that. You get all these hits for smart matches and stuff, and then you have to remember, if you haven't touched that ancestor in a while, you're like, who's got the right information? Yeah. What would you do?
Honestly, I've not encountered that situation. Like I said, the family tree aspect, I put my family tree on there. I don't necessarily fiddle with all the different bells and whistles as much.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Let's see. So Magali is asking, how can I make sure that my family tree is private to me and my invited guests? It's in the settings, Magali. Mm-hmm. So look for the little gear icon when you're in your tree. That's as much as I can tell you without having it right in front of me. But you can definitely control that in the settings. Nancy says she saw a Curtis on Melissa's tree, and you might be interested to know that there's a Curtis Family Society that you can join. And I will put, it's www.curtis with 2 S's.org. So I'll put that in the chat. If you want to check that out, you can. Thank you, Nancy.
Yes, my grandmother was a Curtis.
Okay, Nancy wants to know, can one find a location? Well, basically she's saying, can you figure out if the newspaper section of MyHeritage has a particular location? So she's looking for 19th century Germany, Prussia. How would she figure it out?
I believe if I'm seeing the search page in my mind, there was a way to search by location.
I know that there's a way where you can specify location. I don't know if there's specifically a list or not, but you can definitely specify the location.
Yeah.
And Kathleen is asking, can you search by state, city, or name? And you can definitely search by name.
Yes.
And you can also search by keyword. I just discovered that recently.
Yes. Mm-hmm. You can.
All right. Let's see if there are any. Denise is asking, in my tree, can people go in and change things or just look at your information? And that, again, that's going to depend on if you have it public or private.
Yes, that's right.
So if your information is public, then yes.
Yes.
Leslie says, what are family statistics? I don't know. We're going to have to wait for Yuri's webinar. I mean, I can only imagine. I can only imagine. I think he's going to break down statistics of all the trees on MyHeritage. maybe where they come from and how many kids they have. I don't know. We'll have to find out. All right, let's see if there are any other questions here. Some of these, I just don't think you're going to know specifically because they're getting into like foreign countries. Czechoslovakia, I don't think you're specialized in Czechoslovakia.
No, unfortunately, no. And don't forget to look at the links that I put in the handout of other free MyHeritage webinars that I think would really help people who want to really know about MyHeritage, the records, family trees, things like that.
Okay, here's a question from Joyce. She says, is there any way to have a large letter collection digitized?
Yes, there is, because I can tell you that all of the correspondence between John and Abigail Adams, some of our founding families, all of their letters have been digitized, and they were very, very big letter writers.
Yeah.
So yes, there is a way, but it takes your scanning page by page.
So some of these commercial photo places probably can handle projects like that.
Yes, they could. Absolutely.
And I wouldn't know where to specifically recommend you for something like that, but I know that if, there are good quality places kind of local nearby, most people, or at least in a major city. Graham asks, when gifting a photograph or document to an archive, can one set access restrictions?
Yes, you can. And on that deed of gift, there normally is a place where the donor can request restrictions. Now, you have to remember that the archive has to agree to those restrictions. And I'll give you an example. Famous people or presidents or people like that, when they have donated what are called their papers to particular places, sometimes will put restrictions on there that they can't be open to the public till 50 years after I'm dead. And if the archive agrees to that, then they can, do the deal and they have their records, but they can't allow them to be accessed by the public for whatever the restrictions are listed.
So how often is that sort of thing a deal breaker for an archives? Because I imagine if people get too specific with their restrictions, an archive might just say no.
And that does happen, because the whole point of an archive accepting your collection is that they want to make it available to the public. All it comes down to on, what's in the records. Does the archive really want to have those records because of what's in them? And that eventually, they will be made available to the public. Or, how important maybe the person is, and that they want to have the prestige of having their records at their archive. But yeah, the donor can ask for those kind of restrictions.
All right, let's see here. Just another question or two. Tom says, can I put my ancestry tree into MyHeritage?
There is a link or a thing you can click that says upload GEDCOM, so I'm guessing that you can put it up there.
Yeah, so you would go into the settings on Ancestry and select Export to GEDCOM, and then the file would download to your computer, and then you would go to MyHeritage, and then you would do Import GEDCOM, and you'd import that same file.
I've never done that. I guess maybe I like I don't know. I like putting in my tree one person at a time, so I didn't do that.
That's so weird. I do too. When I start a new tree, I prefer to do it one person at a time. There's usually a specific reason why I'm creating a new tree in a new place, and I really like to be careful with it, so I don't ever do that.
I don't know if it's because it makes me look at them and all the details again.
Exactly.
Maybe that's what it is, but
so.
I enjoy putting them in one at a time. So
yeah. I mean, it's certainly tedious, but
it is.
Let's see here. I think that is going to do it. You've done a terrific job here with the questions. I might have missed one or two, but you've been a really good sport answering questions, even the MyHeritage related ones, Melissa. We're not expecting you to be a MyHeritage expert, but you've done a good job. I mean, it's with specific things, like privacy and all these settings and functions.
Sure.
We don't expect you to know everything. You're not You're not an employee of theirs. So, but you've done a great job. So many great comments here. Allison said, awesome webinar. Magali said, great presentation. Denise says, thank you very much. So definitely the crowd here really enjoyed this.
Well, thank you for having me.
Any parting words for our audience?
Just get on MyHeritage, look at these databases, don't skim and don't think that, it's just too hard to search. Dig in, go into that collection catalog, get into those newspapers and just start reading the newspapers. You'll be amazed at how many times you can find your ancestors in a local newspaper if you just start reading their local newspaper. So just go in there and dig.
Great. Great suggestion. All right, everyone, that is going to do it for today. Join us again in 2 weeks when Yuri Gonen is talking about family site statistics. So we'll see you then. Bye, everyone.